Well, the latest ABC News poll is good news for Kamala Harris. It shows Vice President Harris polling at 51% of likely voters to Donald Trump's 47%. The poll also showed Kamala Harris with a larger lead with black men and Latino men than Joe Biden had 4 years ago. If this poll is accurate, it proves that speculation about Kamala Harris' possible weakness with black men and Latino men is false if this poll is correct. The Harris campaign stressed that point about this poll in reaction to what they clearly regarded as a very good news poll for their campaign. The President of the United States became one of the 45 million Americans to vote early in the presidential election today when he cast his vote in Newcastle, Delaware, after waiting in line for 37 minutes. That is 37 minutes longer than Donald Trump would ever wait in line for anything. That is 37 more minutes of public humility than Donald Trump has exhibited in his 78 years of life. 3 months ago, President Joe Biden thought that he would be voting for himself today. He was asked what it felt like to vote for Vice President Kamala Harris instead of himself.
Is it bittersweet for you?
Oh, this is just sweet.
This is just sweet. We have never had a more decent person than Joe Biden serve as President of the United States. And we have never had a more indecent person in that job than Donald Trump.
Mr. President, can you come here and comment on former President Trump's rally yesterday? He was saying a bunch of stuff about immigrants.
It's simply embarrassing. It's beneath any president, but that's what we're getting used to. That's why this election is so important. You know, most of the presidential scholars I've spoken to talk about the single most consequential thing about a president's character. And he puts that in question every time he opens his mouth.
Trump campaign apologists spent the day trying to distance Donald Trump from some of the featured players on the stage at a Donald Trump rally at Madison Square Garden last evening. The racism flowed freely from the mouths of well-known and unknown racists. Tucker Carlson, who is far less educated than Kamala Harris and obviously less intelligent than anyone who has ever run for president not named Trump, tried to insult Vice President Harris's education and intelligence in classically racist language that he would not even be allowed to say on Fox if he hadn't been fired from what turned out to be his temporary job there. A so-called comedian no one has ever heard of was also blatantly racist with especially poisonous language about Puerto Rico and Puerto Rican people. He said that in a city where more Puerto Ricans live than anywhere outside of Puerto Rico. Both Tucker Carlson and the comedian no one's ever heard of would have been very much at home at the 1939 Nazi Party rally at Madison Square Garden that occurred 2 years before Nazi leader Adolf Hitler declared war on the United States. Imagine how racist the Trump event had to be for the New York Times to headline their report, "A Closing Carnival of Grievances, Misogyny, and Racism in New York City." Donald Trump inadvertently proved himself a liar yesterday about New York City. He held a rally in the belly of the beast, Midtown Manhattan, the heart of New York City. 20,000 people came. 20,000 people who have been told by Donald Trump that they have a 75% chance of being murdered if they enter the New York City subway system. And that's how most of them got to Madison Square Garden. On the same New York City subway system that Donald Trump says will murder them. 20,000 Trump supporters went to the center of a city where they are surrounded by millions and millions of immigrants. Over 3 million immigrants in New York City, where the population is 38% immigrants. That's not counting the children of those immigrants who were born here, the people who Donald Trump insists poison blood. They poisoned the blood of this country. That's what Donald Trump says. A pure Hitler echo. That's what all the Nazis in Madison Square Garden believed in 1939. They believed that Jewish people would poison the blood of any country, including this one. When Donald Trump finally got up to the microphone in Madison Square Garden, he said this to his 20,000 fanatics in the room.
The United States is now an occupied country, but it will soon be an occupied country no longer. Not going to be happening. Not going to be happening. November 5th, 2024, 9 days from now, will be Liberation Day in America. It's going to be Liberation Day. On day one, I will launch the largest deportation program in American history.
The 20,000 Trump fanatics in the room know that this is not an occupied country. Many or most of them live in suburbs where they have absolutely no hint of being occupied. There is no place in the United States more occupied by immigrants than New York City. And that has always been true. There are more immigrants currently living in New York City than there are people in both of the Dakotas combined. And not one of those immigrants who were everywhere around Madison Square Garden had a single harsh word for any of those racists who went to Madison Square Garden to lie about them. There was no violence, none. No Trump supporter angrily going after a suspected immigrant. No liberal New Yorkers getting in arguments with the Trump supporters, not a single punch thrown. No one cared. No liberal New Yorkers cared that the Trump fanatics were there, and the Trump fanatics didn't care that they were in the heart of what Donald Trump calls occupied territory. No Trump fanatics were afraid to be there because they had no reason to be afraid. They were in one of the safest places in America, New York City. That's what Trump and his fanatics proved yesterday, just how safe New York City is. Just a few blocks away from the Trump racism carnival, Kenneth Branagh was doing King Lear. In other words, it was just another day in New York. You can come here to New York City and publicly insult the millions of people living here, or clap for someone spewing racist hysteria about millions of people who live here, and nothing will happen to you. Nothing. No one has to protect you, because New Yorkers have seen it all and heard it all, and because New York City and the United States of America are not the places Donald Trump says they are. They are very different places than what Donald Trump describes to his followers, and 20,000 of his fanatics discovered yesterday that Donald Trump has been lying to them about New York City. New York City proved to Donald Trump and to the world yesterday that Donald Trump has been lying about New York. When Donald Trump and his most racist public supporters and his most fanatical followers gathered in the very heart of New York City, no one cared. And not a single Trump supporter had a moment of fear, not a moment of fear in the entire experience, because that's how safe and accommodating New York City is. Donald Trump, of all people, proved that about New York City yesterday. And while New Yorkers were ignoring the 20,000 fanatics who hate them gathered at Madison Square Garden, more than 10 times that number of people were voting for president in New York City. 258,000 votes were cast in New York City on what was the first weekend of early voting, according to normal voting patterns. More than 200 of those votes would go to Kamala Harris. That's what New Yorkers were doing while they were ignoring the racism carnival at Madison Square Garden. They were voting for Kamala Harris, the candidate who was being attacked in Madison Square Garden because she is black and because she is a woman. And today, here's what's happening in that same subway system where Donald Trump says you have a 75% chance of being murdered just by walking down the stairs. Here's what I saw on that very safe subway system on the way to work today. The luckiest people in town on their way to the Yankees World Series game in the Bronx. A Yankees World Series game is a collection of some of the very richest people in New York City. Those Yankees World Series tickets are not cheap. And those rich people go to the World Series at Yankee Stadium on the subway because that is how safe it is and because no one in New York City believes Donald Trump's lies about this being an occupied country. We're going to be joined later in this program, as I said, by Texas Senate candidate Colin Allred, who took the stage in Houston Friday night before Beyonce and Kamala Harris spoke.
Many of y'all probably know where you were on January 6th. I know where I was. I was on the House floor doing my job. I remember when they locked all the doors. We barred the doors the president walks through to deliver the State of the Union with furniture that we usually use to hold paper. I texted my wife, Allie, who was 7 months pregnant with our son, Cameron. Whatever happens, I love you. Because when you're the only former NFL linebacker in the room, and there's a mob at the door, everybody's like, what you gonna do, Colin? And I went to public school in Texas. I'm not just gonna sit there. So I took off my suit jacket, and I was prepared to defend the House floor from that mob. That's what happened. At the same time, after he'd gone around the country lying about the election, after he'd been the objector to the results in Arizona, Ted Cruz was hiding in a supply closet.
Cowardice really is a Republican brand now, especially when it comes to fear of people they don't know. They aren't just afraid of immigrants, even though we all came from immigrants, but they are now afraid of everyone who does not vote for Donald Trump. That is what Donald Trump now calls the enemy within. Donald Trump has promised to prosecute anyone who has contributed money to the Democratic presidential campaign. That's millions of people. Donald Trump has said he wants to prosecute everyone who supports the Harris for President campaign, everyone who votes for Kamala Harris. That's going to be about 80 million people. It is madness, of course, and it is impossible. But Trump supporters and Donald Trump obviously are intellectually incapable of figuring out which of Donald Trump's hateful plans are impossible to actually carry out. Vice President Harris commented today on the Trump racism carnival at Madison Square Garden.
Donald Trump this is not new about him, by the way. What he did last night is not a discovery. It is just more of the same and maybe more vivid than usual. Donald Trump spends full time trying to have Americans point their finger at each other, fans the fuel of hate and division, and that's why people are exhausted with him. That's why people who formerly have supported Donald Trump, have voted for him, are supporting me, voting for me.
Michelle Obama made her first campaign appearance for Kamala Harris in Kalamazoo, Michigan on Saturday. She asked for forgiveness for being a little frustrated and even a little angry.
Whether it's online or in the media or in our social circles, there are folks who say they're not sure about Kamala. They accuse her of not providing enough policy detail. Some wonder, do we really know her? Is she too aggressive? Is she not aggressive enough? There are folks sowing seeds of doubt about whether she's who she appears to be. Now, don't get me wrong. Voters have every right to ask hard questions of any candidate seeking office. But can someone tell me why we are once again holding Kamala to a higher standard than her opponent? We expect her to be intelligent and articulate, to have a clear set of policies, to never show too much anger, to prove time and a time again that she belongs. But for Trump, we expect nothing at all. No understanding of policy, no ability to put together a coherent argument, no honesty, no decency, no morals. Instead, too many people are willing to write off his childish, mean-spirited antics by saying, well, Trump's just being Trump, rather than question his horrible behavior. I hope you'll forgive me if I'm a little frustrated that some of us are choosing to ignore Donald Trump's gross incompetence while asking Kamala to dazzle us at every turn. I hope that you'll forgive me if I'm a little angry that we are indifferent to his erratic behavior, his obvious mental decline, his history as a convicted felon, a known slumlord, a predator found liable for sexual abuse. All of this while we pick apart Kamala's answers from interviews that he doesn't even have the courage to do, y'all. So to the men who love us, let me just try to paint a picture of what it will feel like if America, the wealthiest nation on earth, keeps revoking basic care from its women, and how it will affect every single woman in your life. Your girlfriend could be the one in legal jeopardy if she needs a pill from out of state or overseas, or if she has to travel across state lines because the local clinic closed up. Your wife or mother could be the ones at higher risk of dying from undiagnosed cervical cancer because they have no access to regular gynecological care. Your daughter could be the one too terrified to call the doctor if she's bleeding during an unexpected pregnancy. This will not just affect women, it will affect you and your sons. The devastating consequences of teen pregnancy won't just be borne by young girls, but also by the young men who are the fathers. They too will have their dreams of going to college. Their entire future is totally upended by an unwanted pregnancy. If you and your partner are expecting a child, you will be right by her side at the checkups, terrified if her blood pressure is too high, or if there's an issue with the placenta, or if the ultrasound shows that the embryo was implanted in the wrong place, and the doctors aren't sure that they can intervene to keep the woman you love safe. I am asking y'all from the core of my being to take our lives seriously.
And tonight in Philadelphia, President Obama said this.
The man holds this big rally at Madison Square Garden. And the warm-up speakers were saying we're trotting out and peddling the most racist, sexist, bigoted stereotypes. One guy called Puerto Rico, quote, an island of garbage. Now, these are fellow citizens he's talking about. Here in Philadelphia, they are your neighbors. They are your friends. They are your co-workers. Their kids go to school with your kids. These are Americans. They're people. And that is the reason why this election should not be close. It should be clear. Here's a good rule. If somebody does not respect you, if somebody does not see you as fellow citizens with equal claims to opportunity, to the pursuit of happiness, to the American dream, you should not vote for them. You should not expect them to make your life better. They will not help you make they will not help you pay the bills. They're not gonna work hard to make sure your kid gets a good education. They're not gonna help you with a down payment on a house. I mean, we have to reject the kind of politics of division and hatred that we saw represented. America's ready to turn the page. America's ready for a better story. Philadelphia, we are ready for a president, Kamala Harris.
And tonight in Michigan, Vice President Harris said this.
We are all here because we are fighting for a democracy and for the right of people to be heard and seen. We're not about the enemy within. We know we are all in this together. That's what we are fighting for. So I say to everyone here what you know. Generations of Americans before us fought for freedom. And now the baton is in our hands. The baton is in our hands. And I want to speak specifically to all the young leaders, all the students who are here today. I want to speak to you for a moment. So I love your generation. I really do. And one of the things about it is you are rightly impatient for change. I love that about you. You are impatient for change. Because look, you have only known the climate crisis and are leading then the charge to protect our planet and our future. You young leaders who grew up with active shooter drills and are fighting then to keep our schools safe. You who now know fewer rights than your mothers and grandmothers are standing up for reproductive freedom. And for you then, I know that these issues that are at stake, they are not theoretical. This is not political for you. It is your lived experience. And I see you, and I see your power. And I know many of you are voting for the first time. Can I see a raise of hands? Who's voting for the first time? Can we hear it for our first-time voters? See, that's why I know the future of our country is bright. That's why I know. So listen, so much is on the line in this election, and this is not 2016 or 2020. We can all see that Donald Trump is even more unstable and more unhinged, and now he wants unchecked power. And this time, there will be no one there to stop him, not even the Supreme Court.
Coming up, clinical psychologist and niece of Donald Trump, Mary Trump, will join us. That's next. Here's a lie Donald Trump has told about growing up in New York City.
My parents would drop me off at a subway, and I'd go to Union Turnpike, or I'd go to wherever They had no fear that I was going to be disappearing. They would take me to a subway, put me on and say, bye, darling, bye. If you do that today, you have about a 75% chance that you'll never see your child again. What the hell has happened here?
Joining us now is Mary Trump, clinical psychologist and niece of Donald Trump. She is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Who Could Ever Love You? A Family Memoir. Mary, thank you very much for joining us tonight after your uncle's not so triumphant return to his hometown yesterday. What he says about the subway when he was a kid, which it's hard to believe, parents dropping a kid at the subway. If you were old enough to ride the subway yourself, you got to the subway yourself. But that's his story. What do you make of the fairy tales he tells about his past and this lie about how dangerous New York City is now? You're going to 75% of you will be killed if you go into the subway.
Well, Lawrence, first of all, it's great to be here, especially in wake of last night, which for various reasons I found appalling, which is the only sane response. I think right now what we're dealing with and have been dealing with for a while now is just Donald's incapacity to manage his own terror. And the only way for him to try to do that is to project it onto other people. His lies are so transparent that I think partially what the problem is why so many people continue to buy into them or seem to want to be afraid all of the time. Like they seem to want somebody to strike fear into them at every moment. Mm-hmm. But I imagine it's for similar reasons. Donald feels like he is losing his grip. He knows on a very deep level that he is not in control. And I think he's beginning to suspect that he never has been. And that goes back to these very, very old and deep pathologies. And with the subway incident, that was normal. And yeah, he would have walked because it was only like 6 blocks from my grandparents' house to the subway on Hillside Avenue and 179th Street. But he also, there's a bit of grievance there, as if he feels like they abandoned him somehow. So the thing about Donald Trump that is so remarkable is that he is the same person now as he was then, but the fears, the grievances, and the incapacity to contain any of it has worsened over time.
One thing he doesn't talk about is that his mother was an immigrant, doesn't often mention that he's married to immigrants when he's in these anti-immigrant hate festivals like at Madison Square Garden.
No, that's a bad look. And it's not like it's a secret. I mean, we know this. Not only was my grandmother an immigrant, both of his grandparents were on his father's side. So it's been a question that he's dodged forever. What kind of immigrant can you be? He used to lie and say he was Swedish because he and my grandfather believed that discussing their German roots would make it difficult for them to do business with Jewish realtors in New York City. He apparently forgot that my grandmother was from Scotland. But it's part and parcel of the hypocrisy and what he's allowed to get away with. And I think we're at the point with his followers and his enablers and his sycophants where it literally doesn't matter anymore. Reality doesn't matter. The only thing that matters to them is Donald's version of things. And time again, and this has been going on for years now, but it's only getting more extreme, he proves the truism that fragile systems bend towards their most dysfunctional member, and that's always him.
We're going to squeeze in a quick commercial break here because we want to continue with Mary Trump. We will be right back. And we're back with Mary Trump. And here's more of what Donald Trump had to say at Madison Square Garden.
My father's looking down on me right now. He was a tough guy, but he was like legit. And I know my mother's in heaven. I'm not 100% sure of my father, but it's close. But he's looking down at me right now. And he's saying, how the hell did this happen to my son?
Mary Trump, what's he talking about?
Oh, Lawrence, truer words. Yeah, Donald's always telling on himself. And one thing we know, or should know by now, is that when Donald says things like that, or especially when Donald speaks in those self-aggrandizing ways, the best, the greatest, the most fantastic, he's speaking to an audience of one, and that's my grandfather, who's been dead since 1999. My grandfather was the person who had the most influence on Donald, who's the person who's most responsible for creating this person before us. And there's a very significant difference between the two, though. My grandfather cared about nothing but his empire and its legacy. For very complicated reasons, he decided that my dad, the oldest son and namesake, was not the person to carry that on. He decided it was Donald. If my grandfather knew that Donald had sold Fred Trump's real estate empire lock, stock, and barrel in 2004, Donald knows exactly what my grandfather would have to say to him. And the difference is that because Donald basically, and I don't mean to generate any sympathy for the man because he deserves none, but was shaped by a sociopath. Donald himself, who has been desperate for love his whole life, but because of his father, has been rendered incapable of being loved, is a nihilist. So he doesn't believe that anything can survive beyond him. There is no legacy. And he's trapped in this very dark and twisted vision of what the world is. And unfortunately, and we're seeing this, the fact that this race is a coin flip, we're seeing that apparently a lot of Americans are trapped in it too. And at this point, I'm more worried about that than I am about the other thing. But Donald, again, he has on occasion this ability to tell the truth accidentally, and he did it last night by invoking my grandfather in that way.
That just feels like such an important insight that we just learned, that he doesn't care at all about what he leaves after him, like many other rich people, including your grandfather, who wanted that name on those buildings forever, wanted that empire to stand forever. Donald Trump, the second it's over for him, it's just plain over. He doesn't care at all what happens after that. That's Mary Trump. You're the only one who can tell us these things. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you. And coming up, before Beyonce and Kamala Harris took the stage Friday night in Houston, Democratic Senate candidate Colin Allred got the crowd of 30,000 Texans chanting, "Beat Ted Cruz." That's next.
That's right. That's right. You hear that, Ted? You hear that? Let's go, Texas.
We are at the precipice of an incredible shift, the brink of history. I'm not here as a celebrity. I'm not here as a politician. I'm here as a mother. A mother who cares deeply about the world my children and all of our children live in. A world where we have the freedom to control our bodies. We all have a role to play to make this a reality. We're all part of something much bigger. We must vote. And we need you. It's time to sing a new song.
If he were reelected, he'd probably get to appoint one, if not two, members to the United States Supreme Court, at which point Donald Trump will have packed the court with 5 out of 9 justices on that court who will sit, but think about that, who will sit for lifetime appointments. It is not only the presidency that is on the ballot. There are many important races, including Colin Allred running for Senate, who we must note his opponent supported a national abortion ban 6 times. And an opponent who said he does not support exceptions even for victims of rape and incest.
Texas Democratic Senate candidate Colin Allred also spoke to the 30,000 Texans at that rally Friday in Houston.
If you are singularly responsible for taking away a fundamental freedom from Texas women because you think you know better than Texas women and their families and their doctors, and you put in place this abortion ban, and you celebrate this abortion ban, you introduce at the national level 5 times a nationwide abortion ban, then you have to lose your job. Texas families. You know, Allie and I have been blessed with 2 healthy babies in Dallas in the last 5 years. I can't imagine if at one of our appointments, the doctor would come in and says, a problem with the baby or with my wife, but there's nothing I can do because Ted Cruz thinks he knows better. That's not who we are. There's one thing I know about us as Texans, and I'm a 4th-generation Texan. It's that we believe in freedom, and this is not it. So here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to do, Texas. In 10 days, we're going to beat Ted Cruz.
Joining us from the campaign trail in Texas, Democratic Congressman Colin Allred. He is the Democratic nominee running for United States Senate in Texas against Senator Cruz. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. You know, when I was watching you Friday night, I just thought, you know, look, I haven't seen you give a lot of campaign speeches. We're not able to cover them, but that was as good as I've seen for any Senate candidate this year. What do you think it meant first of all, for those 30,000 Texans who were there, who presumably are going to be part of your support team on Election Day and Vice President Harris's support team on Election Day? But what has been the impact in Texas since then?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on, Lawrence. That event was incredible. Houston was on fire. And we were talking about the stories of Texas women and Texas families. And I just want to note that I was introduced by Amanda and Josh Zarowski, who spoke in front of 30,000 people, millions of folks watching online and on TV, about the most difficult moment in their lives. When Amanda had a miscarriage and was denied care and had an infection and nearly died because of the law that's in place in this state, because of Ted Cruz's abortion ban. And they went out there with their trauma, with everything they've gone through, and they not only talked about it, but they said, we're going to turn that into action. And I'm so inspired by them. I'm so inspired by so many of these Texas women who've come forward and talked about what's been happening, because these are the stories that are also going to lead to us beating Ted Cruz, making Roe v. Wade the law of the land again, and ending forever the idea that someone like Ted Cruz knows better than Texas women.
You know, one of the things that was so striking about that event Friday night was that it was a single issue event from start to finish. You had doctors, you had medical providers on the stage up there earlier in the evening. You had these real victims of this law telling their stories and you taking your position in what you need to do on your end about dealing with what they're suffering. What should Texans hope for in the election of Kamala Harris and Colin Allred in terms of that issue of reproductive freedom in Texas?
Well, you're right, Lawrence. And I got to talk to Texans about how small Ted Cruz is, that he's too small for our state, that his vision for us is too small, and that when we beat him, we'll have a senator who will represent all 30 million of us, but who also will restore freedom to Texas women and Texas families. You know, we have gone so far. We have an attorney general who's talking about tracking folks' pregnancies and seeking medical records on women who've traveled out of state to get the care that they need. We have counties saying you can't drive through the roads if you're going to use the roads to access an abortion. And as you and I talked about, Lawrence, how are they going to enforce that? They're going to pull Texas women over, ask them, what's the nature of your travel, ma'am? How far are we going to go down this road? And we're not going to go any further. On November 5th, we're going to turn the page. We're going to restore freedom. We're going to make Roe v. Wade the law of the land again. It's not going to be a win for me or for a party. It's going to be a win for our state and for women all across this country.
You're the only Democratic Senate candidate who has been endorsed by Liz Cheney. What do you think that means for your campaign?
Well, Liz and I are friends, but that's not why she endorsed me. She endorsed me because she knows that Ted Cruz is a threat to our democracy. And if anybody watched the debate that he and I had, when I was starting to talk about what happened on January 6th, he was over there giggling. And I told him that it wasn't funny and that he is a threat to democracy. Because on January 6th, it wasn't just the folks at the top. It was Ted Cruz who was the architect of that attempt to overturn the last American presidential election. And when that mob came and I was ready to hold a door and defend my colleagues, he was hiding in a supply closet. And that's okay, as I've said many times. Now it's time for him to have his accountability in this election.
Texas Senate candidate Colin Allred, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence.
We'll be right back. Tonight's last word is happy birthday, Al.